Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, Rwanda is accused of backing the militants whose attacks have caused enormous humanitarian crises in neighbouring DR Congo, and says it will not withdraw troops as it is its national security that is under threat from the deepening conflict. Also, Somali terror group Shabaab reports that 2 Cuban hostages abducted from Kenya almost 5 years ago were killed in a US airstrike. We hear from our correspondent in the region. And this hunger is too much. More protests in Nigeria over crippling 30% inflation that has left many struggling to pay for food. But first, military tensions between Rwanda and DR Congo continue to escalate. Relations have deteriorated since M23 rebels restarted attacks in eastern DR Congo 2 years ago, in which thousands of civilians have since died and hundreds of thousands forced from their homes across North Kivu. Now, UN experts say that they have solid evidence that Rwanda actively supports the M23. Kigali denies this. On Monday, Rwanda rebuffed US calls for the withdrawal of troops and missile systems from DR Congo, saying that they threatened the lives of civilians in the region. Kigali says that it will do what it takes to ensure its own security. Clement Diroma tells us more.
In a lengthy statement, the Rwandan government claims to face a serious threat to its national security following a military reinforcement by the Congolese army and its allies in North Kivu. Amongst them, members of the FDLR, Rwandan Hutu rebels, some of whom were involved in the genocide against the Tutsis. The Rwandan statement asserts that Congolese authorities have repeatedly declared their intention to invade Rwanda and that measures have been taken accordingly to ensure a total air defense and to reduce offensive air capabilities to deal with the introduction of Chinese attack drones by the DRC. Several drones used to combat the rebel group M23 have reportedly been shot down on the front lines in recent weeks. Faced with rebel advances towards Sake, the last town before Goma, the capital of North Kivu, the United States condemned Rwanda's support for the armed group over the weekend and called for an end to fighting and the withdrawal of Rwandan troops. Kigali, which has always denied this support in the past, claims that Washington presents a distorted image of reality.
Now, over the weekend, Kinshasa accused Rwanda of using a drone to attack a plane at an airport near Goma. Protesters burned the flags of Western countries there on Monday, accusing them of doing little to hold their neighbour to account over the violence that has devastated the lives of so many. The fighting continues. M23 rebels have been advancing towards the town of Sake. That has sent over 135,000 people fleeing towards Goma over the last few months. The intensifying conflict has disrupted food supplies, ratcheted up the pressure on hospitals trying to treat the injured, and 2.5 million people are already displaced across North Kivu from the last few years of disruption. Emmett Livingston is in Goma and joins us now with more on this conflict. Emmett, first of all, let's start off with Rwanda's statement on Monday. Why does it have such a particular problem with the FDLR in a conflict that's so complex already?
Thank you, Georgia. Well, the Rwandan government is the party that won the Rwandan civil war and kicked out the genocidal regime. And the FDLR rebel group that is active in eastern DR Congo is the descendant of that regime that committed the genocide in Rwanda. So from Kigali's point of view, this presents a dangerous threat to the country.
But they're not really a major player in this conflict, are they? In comparison, for example, to the M23, what role does the M23 play in this latest flare up of a region that has seen so much disruption and violence over the last few decades?
Certainly, the FDLR is not considered to be a credible military threat to Rwanda. It exists, but it's very weak. The M23, on the other hand, has sophisticated weaponry and it is very strong. It has been waging an active rebel campaign for the better part of 2 years, for over 2 years now. has captured large chunks of North Kivu. And when we talk about the M23 conflict, it's really the M23 that is driving the conflict. It's most often the one that is advancing and that is putting pressure on the Congolese army. And that is triggering this massive movement, this massive displacement of people.
Now, we've seen this conflict take on a new nature recently. Do you feel that the neighbors, Rwanda and DR Congo, are on a war footing at the moment?
That certainly seems to be the case, and especially so in Congo, where beefing up the military, which is notoriously weak, has been at the top of politicians' minds for a long time now. The Congolese state has significantly invested in its military over the past few years. It has brought in regional forces. It has brought in European private military contractors who are there officially to train the Congolese troops. And it has also bought sophisticated weaponry such as Chinese attack drones. And it looks to be a similar picture on the other side of the border in Rwanda.
The scope of the humanitarian crisis is immense. More than 1 million people displaced over the last 3 months alone. Why do you think this doesn't take up more space, doesn't attract more international attention?
The depressing fact of the situation is that there are bigger crises happening in the world, at least in the eyes of the international community. Ukraine and Gaza tend to dominate attention, and African conflicts historically just don't generate as much interest, or they're not considered as important. On top of that, I think there's a general sense of fatigue. People would just like this conflict to go away, and it is something that has its roots that go back decades and decades and decades, and conflict has been ongoing in Eastern DRC for 30 years. This is just another iteration of the conflict, and I think it's quite difficult to draw people's attention to it when they've been living with it for their whole lives.
Thanks very much. Amit Livingston there speaking to us from Goma in northeastern DR Congo. Now, 15 of the 20 candidates approved to stand in Senegal's postponed presidential election have said that the rescheduled vote should happen before April 2nd. That's when incumbent Macky Sall's term runs out. Last week, the Constitutional Court overturned his decision to delay the election from its original date of February 25th. That move plunged Senegal into its deepest political crisis in recent memory. And hundreds of Nigerians protested against the rising cost of living that has left many struggling to eat. The end of fuel subsidies and currency controls were meant to attract investment and cut government spending. But prices have rocketed as the naira slides against the dollar. Laurent Berstecker tells us more.
Struggling to make ends meet, hundreds of Nigerians took to the streets of Ibadan to denounce the country's rising cost of living, which many blamed on the government's failed economic policies.
Do you want to kill us? Are you the first person to govern? We can't go to school. We can't pay our transport fares. We are hungry. We are angry.
Look at us now. There is nothing. We are starving. Tinubu should please do something. This is not his promise. He promised to do better. Look at us now.
Over the past year, the Nigerian naira lost 230% of its value, while national inflation reached a record 30% last month. This means the prices of basic goods such as rice and fuel have more than tripled, while products like meat and eggs are now considered a luxury. Many Nigerians have directed their anger at the government and are blaming President Bola Tinubu for failing to deliver on his campaign pledges.
It seems like the government hasn't been able to get a handle of it, and it has been increasing, and it keeps increasing right now. It's gone up since January as well, 2024, up until this month, and we're asking, when is it going to stop?
Following his election last year, Bola Tinubu undertook a series of liberal reforms meant to open up the economy and attract investors. But the unpopular measures, which included scrapping gas and fuel subsidies, have so far not yielded the expected results.
Somali extremists, Al-Shabaab, have said that 2 Cuban doctors kidnapped in Kenya in 2019 have been killed. The Al-Qaeda-affiliated terror group claims that they died in a drone strike last week in the southern Somali state of Jubaland. Our regional correspondent tells us more.
The story has been out of the spotlight over the past few years until last weekend, when the Al-Qaeda-affiliated terror group Al-Shabaab said that the 2 Cuban doctors that it captured in 2019 had been killed in a US airstrike. Now, it's important to take these claims with a pinch of salt, as Al-Shabaab does have a tendency of publishing false information. The deaths have not been independently verified, so there's still a lot of uncertainty over what exactly happened and whether these 2 Cuban doctors have indeed been killed. What we know for sure is that the 2 doctors were kidnapped by Al-Shabaab 5 years ago when they were in the northeastern Kenyan county of Mandera, which borders Somalia. Now, they were there to help improve Kenya's healthcare system. The Cuban government has said that it's been in constant communication with the Somali and Kenyan governments since the capture. And back in 2022, former Kenyan President Kenyatta promised that he was doing everything in his power to ensure the safe return of these Cuban doctors. However, since last weekend, the current Kenyan President Ruto's government has remained silent over the issue.
Well, that's it for Eye on Africa for now. Thanks for joining us, though. Do so again if you can. Till then, take care.
On France24.com. Click Live. Find the stories you want to watch or to read about. Live news 24 hours a day in 4 languages. Explore the topics that captivate you. Are you looking for the latest news or to watch a show on demand? Follow us. Live international news is just a click away. Liberté, égalité, actualité.